this, the name University of Bedfordshire gets increasingly ironic, which I get the Sunderland will be feeling. Oh, London and Scarborough campuses as well. Fantastic. 239 miles. Okay, so ours isn't quite as ironic as that. We have study centres as well. So the orange dots on your page are our study centres. These are sites run by someone else, but we have UOB students. So, sorry, University of Bedfordshire. I appreciate if I've got anyone from Birmingham on the call, they'll be getting angry at me using UOB. But UOB students taught by UOB staff on those sites. We have one in London, because everyone has to have a London campus these days, right? We've got one in Birmingham, because the people we worked with in London set one up in Birmingham. And these are run with a partner called LSC, the London School of Commerce. These didn't exist when I started 5 years back, and now they hold nearly 20% of our members. So that shows the rate of change in our campuses. We've actually lost some over the years. This is the fewest we've had in quite some time. We also have these tiny specialist sites at Emmerdale in Hertfordshire and Arthur Mellows in Peterborough. So that's what we look like. So my 90 miles from main campus to furthest away campus has already been dwarfed, but obviously there are still some challenges here geographically, talking about like the mileage between them. And obvious to our members is definitely the fact that we only have physical space at 2 of these sites. Those orange ones on there, the study centres, we are very unlikely to ever get space at those sites because our university doesn't even own the buildings. So in terms of lobbying to get that space, and some of them don't even have space for the students that we have, to be honest, it's very difficult for us to get out there to those students. We also have a pretty diverse membership at BEDS. I apologise to anyone who saw my boss's presentation yesterday on non-traditional students, because I am going to be repeating some of that. There is a lot of data incoming, I'm afraid. I'm just going to flip over it though. Like you don't have to remember any of this. I'm just sharing it here to show you how we got to know our campuses, because it really informed the way that we made changes and why we made changes. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Too early to lose my voice. Not a good point there. I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here because you're all coming to a session to find out about multi-campus democracy. But it's our satellite sites look so individual. And when we started looking at the level of data that we got, if you don't get that level of data from your university, by the way, you should be demanding it. Like seeing how different your students are on different campuses is so key. Most of these campuses are, after all, established to address either a business need or target a specific market. So the university creates them knowing that they're going to be a bit different. But if you don't know how different they are, it's really important to look at it. And we've certainly found some really interesting intersections between sort of the geography and our membership demographics. I'm just going to share with you here to give you a feeling for how we got to where we are. So, for example, we have a high proportion of mature students at BEDS. According to HESA, we are second only to Birkbeck for the percentage of mature learners, with over 80% of our members being over 21 when they start their studies. What this graph actually doesn't show is that over 25% of them are actually over 40. So we do have a very diverse group. When you look at that by campus, though, it looks completely different. So, oh, apologies, we've lost my legend on this one. So the purple column is now the over 40 column. Red is obviously your 18 to 21, and it goes up from there. So you'll see that we've got some campuses. I mean, Emmerdale, that looks like maybe your sort of campus. That looks like a bit of a party campus, doesn't it? Yep, that's your 18 to 24-year-olds. Very few mature students. However, none of our other campuses look like this. They all look slightly different. So you'll see our Luton campus is still focused down the slightly younger age range, but LSE is completely different. Our LSE sites go through to all the way through to our over 40s. And at Putteridge Berry, you're not going to see anyone under 25. All of our students are over 25 at that site. So when we start looking at that, we can see why these campuses have different feels. Again, if you look at the data here on our home EU international split, on the face of it, we look quite tame. It's probably a couple of you going, oh, no, we're much more diverse than that. We've got much more international students going on. So we've got about 20% international students and 15% EU. But when you look at that by campus, again, it's skewed. So you'll see that the majority of our international students are all on our Luton campus. And then when you go through some of our other campuses, we actually end up with campuses with 0% international students. Now, somebody said in chat they were interested in finding out about how we support international students. Don't worry, that LSE site isn't nearly as boring as it looks. So that looks like a site with 97% home students, right? You're thinking this is going to be a pretty homogenous bunch. But when we looked at the diversity stats of that, we found 74 nationalities on that campus. I had to actually stop. This was just amongst home students, 74 nationalities. I had to stop adding them to my pie chart because I was going to break it. So that's only 21 of my 74 nationalities on that campus. But this is actually because of a recruitment tactic that one of the university's partners use. One of the recruitment partners have been targeting first generation migrants who have been in the UK long enough to start qualifying for student loans. And they're literally going door to door, knock, knock, knock. Did you know that you now qualify for a student loan in the UK? Why don't you come and study with the University of Bedfordshire and change your life? So you see that we actually have this crazy diverse campus, which looks like it should be an incredibly dull and quite homogenous campus. I must admit, that's one of my favourite tricks. You know, when you send out the new boy to find tartan paint, I do this with new officers. We send them to the campus full of home students and they come back saying, I couldn't find a single home student. What are you on about? Because everyone sounds and looks and feels like an EU or an international student. Again, our study profile. So full-time, part-time, only 12% part-time. Some of you will be saying I've got loads more than that. But when we surveyed them, we actually found out that a huge proportion of our full-time students were working more than 3 days a week. A lot of universities would actually make them part-time students, but we actually have degrees that are marketed at people who can study for just 2 days a week. They're studying full-time credits squeezed into 2 days a week. And we've spoken to students, you'll see here again, it's changed. Our Milton Keynes and our LSC sites, loads of students working more than those 3 days a week. And that's actually because they're offering degrees that you do in 2 days, and they're then structuring their work to work 5 days elsewhere to be covering that elsewhere. So, I mean, that's a crazy idea for me, doing a full-time degree alongside a full-time job, and how they do it, I do not know. But that was what we discovered is a big issue on some of our campuses. Less so, obviously, Aylesbury, this is our nursing site. Very difficult to have a full-time job when you're also out on placement. So less of an issue there. We also have a high proportion of commuters. Only 2 of those 9 campuses actually have halls of residence associated with them, and they are far from full. We spoke to students in London Bridge, bizarrely, who were commuting from Birmingham, where we also have a campus, down, and about 5 other universities have campuses, all the way down to London to study at London because of the options that they've been given there for their 2 days a week. So we have a huge number of students that live locally. They don't sort of get into this student bubble in the same way because they're commuting onto campus just for their studies. Even our traditional campuses have almost a third of students with caring responsibilities. And as you might expect, when we moved up to our campuses that are generally older, Milton Keynes and LSC sites, these have become increasingly, we're up to 2/3 of students here with caring responsibilities at LSC. Perhaps that's to be expected of older populations, but we've even discovered that we have campuses where the majority of our students actually enter university with no formal qualifications. So the University of Bedfordshire is a WP, widening participation organisation, and I love working in widening participation institutions. The number of students I meet with that could teach me a thing or 2 or 5 is phenomenal. These guys are coming in with work experience, life experience, as opposed to qualifications. But when you think about them engaging with the SU, they're also probably on the steepest learning curve of all of our students. They've not just stepped out of college, they've maybe been away from college and education generally for 20, 30 years, and now they're coming back to do a degree level course. That learning curve is pretty steep to get to where they need to be to do this. And I think it's safe to say that when we saw this, we suddenly went, well, that makes sense why they haven't got headspace for extracurricular activities, actually. Suddenly it makes sense why Milton Keynes students aren't beating at my door saying, can I set up a society, please? They've got a whole load of other stuff going on. And in short, that's what this data has told us, that, it made us think that our students have got a lot going on outside of university. And interestingly, students that recently took part in focus groups for our new strategic plan told us that they didn't actually expect to be consulted on what we were going to do. They expected us to just be getting on with it and acting in their best interests because they've got other stuff to be getting on with, like their studies. This was quite a shock to us. It feels very strange to me, having spent a decade trying to get student opinion to inform my work. But that is the level of other stuff going on in our students' lives. And actually, when you look at these intersections, when you think, well, these LSE students probably have no qualifications, so have this steep learning curve. They probably have caring responsibilities. They also have a long commute in their day, and a lot of them are working more than 3 days a week. You suddenly start to build up this picture. And I probably wouldn't have believed it myself if I hadn't heard it straight from the horse's mouth. It's something that we're trying to build into our strategies moving forward. So what did this mean for our democracy? We've got this crazy diverse group of students. Surely that means that our democracy is crazy diverse as well, right? Our executive officer team over the last 5 years has really been a story of two halves. We've done a lot of work on this, and we've been trying to diversify this team. And in many respects, it works. We consistently get international students, for example, elected to our team, which I know is a statistic that some unions would give their right arm for. I've not had a year since I've been at Beds where I've not had an international student elected to a full-time executive position. Just to clarify, that's not an international officer position, that's president or vice president they've gone for. And consistently they get elected. We've had increased postgraduate representation in recent years. Again, I know something other unions really fight to get. We even had a PhD student join the team last year, and that was brilliant to have that sort of insight. We've been great at capturing our ethnic diversity. We've had, so 11 out of 23 officers over those 5 years, so just shy of the half mark, have identified as people of colour. And we've had a steadily increasing number of candidates from all those other campuses as well. It used to be that only the big campuses step forward, but increasingly we've seen students from these other sites, from London Bridge and Birmingham, putting themselves forward. We actually have a fair few sabbaticals that actually take a sabbatical year as well, actually taking a break in their studies rather than doing this as a graduate job. So we've captured some great diversity within the team. But on the flip side, we've also had 2 all-male teams in the last 5 years, and you can see there 16 out of the 23 of my officers over the last 5 years were male, which is counterintuitive in an institution where we're 60% female, student-wise. We also have been in a place where all successfully elected candidates were from Luton. They might be our biggest campus, but for a multi-campus university and union, that just wasn't cool for us. And when you look at who's voting, it kind of makes sense how we get this sort of a team. So this is what our votes looked like in 2020. Our voters are not nearly as diverse as the rest of it. So the highlighted slice here shows you the segment of that campus that actually voted in 2020. As you can see, Luton dominates that vote. The vast majority of students were voting from Luton. And you might notice that my 9 campuses I was talking about aren't all represented here, because on some sites, not one single student voted in 2020. Only 5% of students outside of Luton voted in total, and that was up from just 2% in the previous year. So this has been a real ongoing struggle with us. Another way of looking at that data is looking at the percentage of the students who voted compared to the percentage that they are in the student population. So for example, here, our LSE students, they make up 20% of our membership, but only 7% of the electorate. And we wanted to fix that. We decided it was time for change. Diversifying candidates had not solved the problem. I think we often talk about, if we got a more diverse range of candidates, the voters will follow, because the voters will want to vote for people that look like them, that come from their campus, that feel like them. We had really diverse candidates, and still we had this problem engaging voters. So having seen how different our student populations were, it became clear to us that representation of that voice was our key bit. That was our target. I'm not fighting for that headline stat anymore. I'd love to be that union that gets 50% voter turnout at some point. I'll get there, I will. But actually, in the meantime, what is more important to me is that the diversity of our voters reflect our diversity of our members, and that a range of students have their say in our annual elections. So time for change. We set out to do a couple of things. I won't go through all of them today, or you'll be here until tomorrow. Our first target was that we actually set out to improve the diversity in the elected team, and specifically looking at gender in this case. So we actually held a referendum, and we now have gender balanced team with reserved shared positions. So we have a co-president male or non-binary, we have a co-president woman, we have a co-vice president man or non-binary, and we have a co-vice president woman. Those roles were adopted by our membership in January, which left a really tight turnaround to get those job descriptions done, ready for the elections. But we put that in. I won't go into more of that. Please do ask questions later, but that's another webinar for another day. We also wanted to improve the diversity of voters by making it more attractive to them to vote. It needed to speak to them. There needed to be a reason that people were voting in our elections, especially to those that historically we've not heard from, in the hope that we also hoped that this would lead to continued representation in our team, a more diverse team at the other end if we've got more diverse voters, because it didn't work the other way. So we're trying to flip the chain of causation here. The statement that we kept going with was, so we were in a position where it seemed that it was virtually impossible for non-Luton candidates to be elected. That was the statement that we took to our trustees, said this is the position we're in and we want to flip it. We want to get to a place where it seems virtually impossible for any candidate to be elected without gaining cross-campus support. We wanted nobody to be able to win just because they had a lot of friends in Luton, whilst still capturing that diversity that obviously I've spoken about. There's things that we were happy with in the team. And our trustees said that we should get radical. This was simultaneously the most exciting instruction I've ever been given in my career and the most terrifying. After all, we still had to prove that our election still had to appease the university. They still had to be happy that we were following all the rules in the Education Act and we were still holding a free, fair and transparent election. And in my mind, us following the law and the term get radical very rarely go together. So this was a scary, exciting place to be in. So what did we come up with? We toyed with a whole load of things, looked at systems from around the world, and you might be able to tell that this was maybe inspired by the fact that the American elections was on. We moved to a system called campus points, and this is what we've experimented with. If you think about US electoral colleges, this shouldn't seem too strange. So each of our campuses became worth a number of campus points according to the size of the campus. So in this little example, this campus has become worth 7 campus points. For the voter, very little has changed. So they're still casting a vote, they're stating their preferences. We then count one campus at a time. So the votes were divided by campus, use an alternative vote to work out who has won the campus points. So unlike the American system that gives all seats in the college to the winner, we were splitting these up so that it was closer to a proportional representation system. So just as in a multi-seat election, you'd have a quota required to win one of the seats, we had a quota for each campus point. And once you won those campus points, they'd then be divvied up amongst you. Points are won as we go along, just as in most SU elections, you don't win on first preference votes. Not all points were awarded in the first round of voting. That very rarely happened. So just as in a regular count, I apologise to officers in the call who maybe haven't had the joy of counting a union election. I am speaking as though you know how to count union elections. When we distributed all first preference votes, we would then remove the lowest ranking candidate and redistribute to their second preferences. And then as people hit quotas, they'd get more votes. You couldn't lose points once they were won. That was part of the theory. So even if you were eliminated further on, you still held onto those campus points. And we kept going campus at a time until we'd counted up all of the campuses. You can see here, different campuses, different sizes, votes going to different places, the campus points. The winner is then decided using first past the post when we combined all of the campus points. So just as you will have seen in the American elections with points going to Trump and Biden, this time they're split across all of our candidates and the winner is the person with the most campus points at the end of it. We did have a plan for a tie. In the event of a tie, the winner is the candidate who has won the most campus popular votes. And if it's still tied after that, the candidate with the highest popular vote overall would win. So we've got 2 tie-break scenarios in case they're needed. Now, you're probably thinking, well, at least if you like elections, you're probably thinking there's nothing all that groundbreaking here. It's just electoral colleges. And in many ways, you're right. I think we didn't want a system that looked too wild or wacky. We didn't want something that felt completely alien to voters. That wasn't going to work for us. So it still needed to be simple enough to understand and for the candidate to understand as well, because we know that candidates have to explain elections to voters quite often. The main impact at this point was that we've amplified the voices of students on those smaller campuses a bit. So for example, this orange campus that's worth just 3 campus points, it stays worth 3 campus points irrespective of how many students vote. That could just be the 1 student votes on that campus. They're still worth 3 campus points. So that's a really strong message to our candidates that you can't ignore our smaller campuses. You need to go and talk to these students. And that was really key for us to get out. Candidates tended to otherwise lurk around Luton because that's where they knew most bodies were. Now you ignore small campuses at your peril because you don't want somebody else to grab those votes. The point at which we probably spent the most time deliberating was when we were trying to work out how many points each campus would be worth. We could just do it proportionate to the percentage of students that they have, but then aren't we just creating the same problem? Haven't we just got the same thing in there? So we spent a lot of time modeling. We counted a lot of fake elections. I was very electioned out by the end of this. And we tried different circumstances to see if we managed to get to a point where it seemed virtually impossible. This is our statement we're going back to. It's got to seem virtually impossible for any candidate to be elected without gaining support from non-Luton students. So we tried it with hundreds of campus points. So there's 200 campus points up for grabs. We tried it with like 10 campus points up for grabs. And we tried it with everything in between. We took a range of models back to our trustees, essentially to try and ascertain their risk appetite. I see questions coming up about how this falls in. So, that we wanted to know, we knew we were going to have questions, or we were going to face questions. So what was their risk appetite? Precisely how radical did they want us to be? How radical is radical? Do we make all campuses equal? Is every campus worth 10 campus points? Do we keep it along the proportion lines, or do we weight certain campuses more than others? And the feedback we got back from trustees was clear. We had to challenge the electoral power of Luton in order to truly enhance the electoral power of smaller campuses. So in order for this to work, we had to ensure that no campus was worth more than 50% of the total campus points. If any campus is worth more than 50%, you can still win on one campus alone. So no campus was going to be worth more than 50%, which actually meant that we had to essentially reduce the size of a campus in our model. And this was the model that we ended up going in. So you see in this column here, the number of campus points. We ended up with a total of 40 campus points across the board. And this is the variance for sort of between the percentage of campus points that they get and the percentage of members that we have. So you see that for the most part, the small campuses gain a little bit. Luton does take a hit here. Luton has had their voice reduced quite significantly in order to boost the voices of our smaller campuses. It was a gamble, and it was the one we went with the support of our trustees, to see how it worked out. When we did run models with these numbers, it did suggest that a candidate could lose Luton and still win the overall election. So you could pick up support from all of the little campuses and you could still, in theory, win the overall election. That was the theory. And I went into the elections with all of my fingers and toes crossed. I can't lie, playing with democracy in this way didn't half make me sweat. It was very interesting going into this. So what played out? I won't make you watch the entire results ceremony, but it is available on YouTube if you're interested. And you can see how we presented this to the members and how it came back. We were very happy to see that voter turnout increased across the board. So you can see that we've got 10% increase on our solely nursing campus. These students were nursing in a pandemic, and we still managed to increase the voter turnout by 10% on that site. A whopping 16 percentage points increase for students in Milton Keynes. And most importantly to me was that we still saw an increase in Luton. So we've not disenfranchised Luton voters. They've not turned around to me and said, well, sod you then. If you're going to reduce my voice, then I'm not voting. They were still involved. And actually that increase is not entirely incomparable to the Bedford sites that you see there. We also had a record-breaking number of voters for us. Now, it's probably a small number for other people, but 2,600 votes we got, over 2,600 votes we got in. Sadly, it wasn't a record-breaking turnout because the university has grown in recent years, but that is the most voters that we've ever had. And during a pandemic year, we were very happy with that. Quite interestingly, our incumbents, so our current officers who were rerunning, did not get re-elected. Now, when we looked at the votes coming in over the course of the count, that was the 10th day, it appeared that they had still focused their efforts on Luton. They hadn't heeded our warnings about the system changing. They stuck with their old strategies. It got them elected once before, they'll get elected again using it. And they focused on our students at Luton. And it didn't pay off for them. So we got to the point we wanted to be at. You couldn't win an election with support from Luton alone. That was where we got to, which was quite astonishing to see. I must say, even as much as I hoped it would work, I was really chuffed and surprised to see that there. And what did that look like for our team then? We've ended up with the most diverse executive team that I've had in years. So obviously we'd fixed the gender balance through the change in positions. We've attracted 2 PGT students this year. At this point, postgrad students are actually massively overrepresented at the University of Bedfordshire. We've maintained our international student representation, and we've actually gained a first generation EU migrant home student, the ones that I discussed at our NSC sites that have been targeted in recruitment. They're a really significant part of our demographic that we've not really reached before. So we're absolutely delighted to have one of them on the team. We've got a student parent on board, not our first, but hopefully not our last. We're looking forward to that. They're my personal hero. They homeschooling 4 children during a pandemic and doing their masters. My personal hero at this point. Half of the squad are people of colour, so we've maintained that representation as well. We haven't lost anything there. The average age of the team has shot up to 30 years old. Which makes us look a lot more, the officer team looks a lot more like our student body does now, and they span 18 years from the youngest to the oldest. So we really do look like it, and I'm really enjoying watching the faces of university colleagues when they're clearly expecting a 21-year-old to walk through the door and we throw them off with one of our new officers. And probably the biggest win for me is that a student from our London Bridge campus was elected. This campus has only been around for 4 years. We've had candidates before, but they were never successful because only a handful of people ever voted on that campus. But we've got one on the team, and this is really putting our study centres on the map. I've spent years trying to get our officers angry about the student experience on these sites, trying to get them exercise about what's going on for these students. And we've now got somebody with that lived experience to bang that drum. And I'm really excited about what that could do for improving the student experience on these study centre sites. So I'm going to wrap up so you can all ask me questions because I can see them pinging away in chat. Have we fixed the system? To be honest, let's face it, I think there's been too many variables this year for me to tell one way or another at this point. I'm encouraged by the results of our first election, but this was also our first ever online only election at Beds. Some of the successful winners claimed that they didn't even campaign this year. So either I've completely broken democracy, or we're now in a place where people are actually reading manifestos rather than being bribed by sweets. We'll wait and see what happens when we're back to something resembling normality. We'd also extended our voting period because we knew there was so much going on in people's lives. You know, we've got a bad jobs market. Maybe that's why we've got more postgrad students coming forward rather than going off elsewhere. There's a huge range of things to consider. So I'm not willing to start waving a flag just yet and go, yes, I've nailed it. But we didn't have any member complaints. Again, I'm not ruling them out in future. You know, maybe Luton have been distracted by the pandemic and it's all going to kick off next year when they realise what's happened in the system. But we didn't have any member complaints in the run up to or afterwards, or any candidate complaints either. It also has definitely provided us with some great messaging across the board. So for our candidates, we're now saying you can't ignore any campus. One of our campuses this year, it was worth 2 campus points. Only 4 students voted on that campus this year. 4 students were worth 5% of the final campus points. Now, you want to be the candidate that spoke to those 4 students, right? That's the easiest 5% of the vote that you will ever get. So making the effort and going to talk to these small campuses now really pays off. And that's a brilliant message for us to be able to give to candidates. To our students, we can say hand on heart that they cannot win without your support. We have limited Luton so that they cannot win without your support. And we can send out messages personalised to their campus and known campus priorities as well. To the institution, we can now say, look, this proves how seriously we take these other campuses. And especially now that we have a study centre student on the executive team, you know, these problems can't be swept under the rug in the way that they have been before. Just because they're 90 miles away doesn't mean you can ignore them. And I think that's going to be really strong for our officers going into the rest of this year. And you certainly can't deny that we've got the diversity in the team. We're really happy that we've managed to maintain that. We were very worried that we were going to lose that by changing up other things. So I think we've got a really exciting year ahead of us, and fingers crossed, long may it continue. And I've not broken democracy, and it's going to work moving forward. So that's me talking at you. I'm done with that. My email address is on there if you wanted to take any questions online. And you can also jump onto YouTube and watch the whole results show if you so desire, to see how it pans out and how we demonstrated to students how these votes went around. But I'm now going to have a bit of a gander at chat and see what questions we've got coming up. How far back do I need to scroll? There we go. So I've got questions about international students. Example vote count. Right, sorry. Excuse me, folks. I'm going to take some of these slightly easier ones first. So how long is my voting period? So our voting period this year, we actually turned into 2 weeks. I'm not sure we would have made that decision if we were online, if we weren't online. I think the fact that we weren't on campuses, we wouldn't obviously expect campaigners to be campaigning for 2 whole weeks. And we very much split that period into sort of a push week and a pull week for comms. So we actually spent a week trying to get messages out to students, the union, on behalf of candidates. We were saying to candidates, please don't kill yourselves over this. You know, you cannot take 2 weeks out to do this campaigning. Look after yourselves. We're going to spend this week getting this message out to as many people as we can. And then there was the week that we were trying to use candidates and work with candidates to pull in the votes beyond that. There wasn't actually a massive flux in that 2 weeks. We didn't have like, you know, a massive peak at the start. We didn't have our standard W wave that you get with your elections normally, with your peaks at the beginning and end. It was actually much more standard throughout, almost the same number of votes every day. And we were very sure to make sure we did different messaging throughout that period to sort of mix it up. But I think it paid off, giving students long to think about it, particularly when we've got students that are doing placements and things. Allowing them time to maybe be on a week that's a bit quieter than the previous week really seems to have paid off and got them involved. Interested at Edinburgh. Okay, so in Edinburgh, they don't normally get re-elected. Very interesting. Tends to happen elsewhere. Interesting. I saw a question about international students, engaging international students. I do think, Wahida, that this one actually, when it comes to international students, we don't work particularly closely with the international office. We have a bit of a strange setup at the university. The international office don't really play with anyone else, so we don't work so closely with them. Our engagement with international students, I think, does tend to come from the international candidates. So actually, our efforts went into that came through in previous years when we put a load of focus into diversifying our candidates. So our evidence does suggest that maybe that is one group of students whereby you can diversify voters and improve voter engagement by improving the candidates. We became a union that was interesting for international students. International students wanted to get involved. We became trendy, and with that came international student voters. We've asked for an example vote count. If I may be cheeky and just send you to my YouTube video, you'll be able to see and pick amongst your own. It does go on for a while. You may only want to watch a couple of campuses. I can only apologize. You should have seen how long the count went on. That's probably one con that I didn't raise. This is not yet automated. We essentially had to go back to doing a paper count for this system. Which, oh, see, I can see the people that have done a paper count before because they're all wincing. Yeah, it was interesting. We were able to automate various elements of it in that we have a spreadsheet that does the counting bit for us, but we did have to do a count for each campus. And there were various points in the process where we had to go back in and do a count for maybe the 6th round of voting or something. That had to be a physical count because there wasn't a way to automate it. We are currently working with a new web provider who has told us that if we've got a spreadsheet that can count it, they can create a system that counts it. We currently have 3 spreadsheets that count it, but we're hopeful that they'll be able to fix this, and we will actually have a system next year that counts this for us, and we don't lose so many days of our lives to counting votes. I just felt so sorry for the candidates that were waiting days for the news whilst we sat there counting. Question from Rosina on candidate welfare during the 2 weeks. Yeah, do you know what? I think that's something that we're going to have to really focus on next year when people are back on campuses and things, hopefully. I think that it was much easier this year because students weren't on campus. They didn't feel the need to be stood by a ballot box for 2 whole weeks. For me, I think it's about us moving to a place where we're not encouraging that. We've even talked about getting rid of ballot boxes altogether. You know, do we stop that so that people don't feel tempted to stand next to the ballot box and give up 2 weeks of their life for this? But definitely this focus on the push and pull. How we said, don't you guys worry, like this bit's on us. Obviously, talk to students that you come across, but you know, you don't have to do too much because we're doing this, and this. We gave a lot of evidence to our candidates of what we were doing. And we had a lot of candidates come back to us saying, "Oi, I don't think you're doing enough. Can you do more, please, to get this message out?" And we changed up our comms plan and we moved as we went with things. So that's kind of been a bit of an ever-moving feast. And I think that's definitely going to be a big struggle for us next year. If we want to maintain our 2 weeks, how do we look after candidate welfare? But that's definitely something we're looking into. And we've got Indica, what support do you think students would need in person to allow them to campaign on other campuses? Good question. So in the past, we've done, we'll pay for your train tickets. Come on, let's get you to other campuses. We'll come with you. We'll show you this campus. We'll show you around. We'll give you the tour. It actually was really difficult to see how that worked. It was quite, you become quite unpopular when you show up at a campus that's pushed for space, particularly these campuses where they're only studying for 2 days a week. They're studying 9 to 5. They have an hour for lunch in the middle. If you show up with like a minibus full of candidates that all want to harass them for a vote when they're trying to have their 1 hour of lunch that they get in the day, we actually did not make many friends in that situation. And students didn't like that very much. Moving forward, we're trying to do a lot more work with the academics on those sites to sort of say, you know, can you free up half an hour for us to come and talk to people? Maybe we can't bring all the candidates with you. Maybe it's about the union turning up with all of their videos or something. Maybe it's about the union bringing that information forward in this sort of controlled environment that makes it a little bit more accessible for the students. Our focus is always on the voters as opposed to necessarily the candidates, because we want, it's the voters that get us places. Sorry, there was a second part to your question. Indigo, are you able to just unmute and tell me what the second part to your question was?
Yeah, I was just asking whether you think it would work better online permanently. So obviously elections were online this year, you had a higher turnout. Do you think it is a method that will be more effective online than it is in person? So we have a lot of campuses across the country. We have Scarborough, Coventry, London, and this idea is really good, but we're not sure how well it would work in person. So if it was going to be a permanently online election system.
It's definitely something we're considering. It's a really tough one though, because like you love the buzz on campus during an election season, right? It's a great time to be talking about the union generally and talking about the work the union does. We don't want to completely lose that buzz. But yeah, I think we'll certainly be, if we stick with the 2 weeks, we'll certainly keep at least half of that as online only. There won't be ballot stations during that period, and you can still vote during that period. You can still do a bit of campaigning, but it's online only, because I think that takes the pressure off of everyone a little bit. And yeah, you're right. It's been a right leveler this year, hasn't it? You know, it doesn't matter whether you're in Scarborough or Coventry, you're getting the same experience. And I think that's meant a lot to voters. And I think that's helped a lot as well. So yeah, we should swap notes. We'll see what ends up happening this year.
Thank you.
Right. Who else?
I think there was one from Raya. If you find this approach does not hold up after a couple of years, what's your plan for the future? And is this something that's under constant review?
Cheers, Davina. Yes, it really is something that is under constant review. Like I said, I don't think we've necessarily got those numbers right. You know, the division of the campus points, and student numbers are changing every year on every campus. You know, they'll have a big push on one campus and suddenly that's twice the size it was the year before. So we have to constantly review this. Otherwise it does become a bit undemocratic and unfair. So we are constantly reviewing it. I don't have the next plan. To be honest, we didn't have this plan until the trustees said get radical. So as it is, we'll definitely be experimenting with this for a little bit longer. I can see it. We've got at least another year in this to see how it pans out in the real world, back in the real world, something resembling normality. But this will be very interesting to see how it pans out. But yeah, constantly reviewing. And I think we can get a bit complacent in student unions about like, oh, elections, we do them every year. This is what we do, copy paste. And I think it's something that we need to review as regularly as we would our freshers program, you know, as regularly as you're changing up the acts that you get along as entertainment.
Okay, we've got another one from, thank you for that response. Another one from Ellie Freeman, and then there's one from Liam. So the one from Ellie, do you think this is something that would work for smaller numbers of campuses? They've got one main site and 2 smaller sites.
Definitely. I'm trying to do the maths in my head and trying to work out how this could work. I think, yeah, I mean, obviously you'd be weighting it differently and you'd be choosing different values for each of the sites. But yeah, I see no reason why it couldn't work. I think it's just such a good message for those smaller campuses for you to be saying, look, we find, you know, this is how important you are. We're going to boost you up a bit actually, because we don't want you to be ignored. And that idea of, you know, if you made your 2 smaller sites each worth 25% of the overall vote, then it doesn't matter how many students vote on those campuses, their voices are still heard. And I think that's something that's really important for us. But do take down my email address and drop me a line if you'd like to discuss that further.
And then Liam was asking about the comms plan. He's had to run off because he's doing a bit of hosting, so he's somebody from Coventry. But yeah, he's just asking about the comms plan, and if what changes you made.
Yeah, so I think we took a lot more on ourselves this year. I think previously it was around, you kind of rely on candidates to put the word out there themselves, and you see patterns in that. Oh, if we've had more candidates, we're likely to have a bigger turnout because they talk to more students, we get more voters. We knew that a lot of our students weren't going to be able to do that. We had some of our students on some of these campuses, they were homeschooling children at the time of our elections. They couldn't sit there on Facebook spamming people all day because the kids had the laptop to do their homeschooling. There was a huge number of challenges in there for our members, and we said we have to take this on. This is down to us to get this message out. So we did things like we started putting there. So it's as part of the manifesto, they had to answer certain questions. For example, if you could change one thing about the UOB experience, what would it be? And we then created just comparison tables for our students that said, look, these 5 candidates are all going for the same role, and these were their 5 different answers for this. And that would be one piece of comms that went out. On another day, we'd do a similar concept, but in a video to speak to a different audience. But there was consistent comms going out on a daily basis, trying to target different audiences. And it was definitely much more about us. And I'll try and pick that up with Liam at some point offline.
No, that's fine. So a couple more, just because I'm conscious of time, because I know that although we have got 10 minutes, you've done brilliantly. So how are you measuring impact? This is from Rosina. Apart from collecting the demographic data, for example, are you collecting candidate/student feedback?
So yeah, we always collect candidate feedback, and we always do a bit of an exit survey. This year we had a much lower turnout on our exit survey, probably because they'd had 2 weeks worth of emails from us saying please vote. When we then sent another email to say why did you vote, they've gone, oh, for goodness sake, isn't that done already? They were probably sick of us by then. So we didn't get as much from our student one this time. But we do always look at our candidates as well and talk to them. Most of our candidate feedback this year was that they appreciated our help. They wanted us to do more. So we've had some really structured conversations with some people around, okay, cool, you've asked for more, this is what we did, what's the bit that's missing? Because I think it's quite easy for us to be sat there going, we're doing everything we can, without getting that far. So yeah, we've really been digging down into that, and I think it's important for it going beyond just a survey and looking into that. We also will be working with the team that have been elected now to talk to them about their experiences. As I said, half of them swear that they didn't do any campaigning. So I need to capture their experience and work out how on earth they got elected then, and work out what we can take from that. So yes, we always collect candidate and student feedback, and I'd recommend that to everyone. It's quite easy these days on various systems to set up an exit survey that does ping out to voters to say thanks for voting, can you tell us why you voted? Even if all you find out is because I read this email or because someone spoke to me, you're still getting a bit of intelligence. I really would recommend that to all.
I'm muted. Excellent, thank you very much. So if there aren't any further questions, there's definitely not any that I've noticed that I've missed. If we have missed any, just please unmute yourself and fire away at Amy, not me. I can't help you at all. But if not, really great to have you here. Thank you, Amy, for really insightful view on how you've done things slightly differently. I think it's definitely given an awful lot of people some food for thought. I am going to pop your email address in the chat, so that people have got that as well, that they can copy and take away, and as Amy said, she's more than happy to get the questions, so there might be quite a few. So thank you so much, and thanks for everybody for joining us all as part of SU21 this year. I hope you're finding it really insightful. You've learned a lot. and you've had a really great opportunity to network with other sabbatical officers and staff members. So if there isn't anything else, you've got a few minutes to have a stretch, grab a drink before you go into your next session. So yeah, thank you everyone, and thanks again to Amy.
Very much.
Thanks all.
Take care. I think we've gone quiet on the questions, which is great.
Lovely stuff.
Yeah, it was a really, really good session. Well done. No, it was brilliant. Very lively, but there's a lot in there. A lot in there as to how to, because that's one of the things I know that we struggle with. It's kind of keeping that consistency across campuses, and actually it's not just from sort of officers, it's also about staff as well. You know, how do we engage appropriately with campuses and offer them the support so it actually feels like a really kind of unified approach? So maybe there's something in there about kind of staff as well, like is there some reward and recognition that happens for those that actually, you know, are really quite passionate about sharing? So yeah, definitely not thinking. Hi Bradley.
I think for us it's about unified but not uniform, because it can't be the same. Bradley,
exactly.
I owe you an email, sir.
Hi Boo. No, so well, sorry, I missed your session. I was really looking forward to it, and I was in a university committee meeting that then went on much longer than I thought it was going to. So sorry, apologies for missing it. Is there going to be a recording available? Do you know?
Yeah. So we were live streaming on YouTube. We are still live streaming on YouTube, and we're also recording. So, I know. Hello. So yes, you'll be able to access it probably in the next half an hour or so, but if not, because I'm not quite sure how the system's working, but if not, we will, as a delegate, you'll get that information as to how to access everything.
Great. Well, I look forward to watching that and catching up on it. Amy, I might drop you an email as well. It would be good to catch up at some point.
Yeah, let's get our teams together again.
Yeah, we've done a lot more on partnerships since we last spoke, but it seems like you are still ahead of us, so it would be good to catch up at some point. But yeah, thanks both.
Smashing. See you, Bradley.
Yeah. Bye.
Yeah, we've got there's other universities and unions that have students on the LSC sites,
right?
And yeah, so we've been trying to make links with those other unions as well to increase our barter power, shall we say?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting approach, and I'm glad it's been successful. You know, because sometimes when you try things that are really quite new and, like you say, really quite radical, it's like, oh, you know, really. But yeah, great, really good results. And like you say, this year's a little bit different. I think anything that anybody's done this year, it's like, got to take it all with a pinch of salt, because we're just dealing with some really different circumstances.
Yeah.
But you saying about Bedfordshire being at the bottom of the league table, my university.
Is it?
Yeah, when we were still Luton.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so I did my business degree there. I actually met my husband there as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, it's a small world.
Very small world. So yeah, I do. I mean, it's been a long time since I've visited, so I'm sure it looks completely different. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a couple of shiny new buildings that have sprung up in the last couple of years, yeah.
But in terms of like business and accountancy, it's always been kind of very well received.
It does well.
You know, yeah.
And that's where the LSE campuses came from. They started as like little business schools springing out. And so most of those sites are only teaching like business or health and social care. Are the ones that really seem to sell at the moment.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think that the business school, I think it's a tough one because they've expanded so quickly, and they were sort of told, "Cool, that sells. Go do this."
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think it's been a rough couple of years for them in terms of how do we still create a nice student experience when we're trying to do this
quickly.
Yeah. But yeah,
that's the thing with growth. There's always, not always, but there can be casualties.
Yeah.
You know, so you're growing rapidly, but then we kind of lose elements as well along the way, and it's just kind of picking those back up and just remembering. But yeah, I did business and organisational behaviour, and he did accountancy and finance. Anyway, match made in heaven and all of that, or match made in Luton at Legends. But we've still got 2 people that are with us, so if there isn't any other questions, I'm gonna end the session. And yeah, lovely to spend some time with you all. take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Fina.